5 Bible verses that are often misunderstood. These are verses you've probably heard quoted many times, but they may not mean exactly what most people think they do. We're going to dive into their historical and scriptural context to get a clearer picture of what they really mean. Let's jump in. Let's start with Jeremiah 29:11. You've probably heard this verse before. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." It's often quoted as a promise of individual prosperity and success, but let's take a closer look. The context of Jeremiah 29:11 is actually a letter written by the prophet Jeremiah to the Jewish people who were in exile in Babylon. God was reassuring them that despite their current suffering, He had a plan for them as a nation. It's not necessarily a guarantee that everything will always go well for us individually, but rather a promise that God has a long-term plan for His people. It's a message of hope in the midst of hardship, encouraging us to trust in God even when things look bleak. Next, we have Philippians 4:13. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." This verse is a favorite among athletes and motivational speakers, often interpreted to mean that we can achieve any goal we set our minds to. Philippians 4:13 is not about personal achievement, but about relying on God's strength. Paul, writing from prison, speaks of enduring hardship and finding contentment in any circumstance through Christ. It's a reminder that true strength comes from what God can do in us, not what we can do on our own. Now let's look at Matthew 7:1. "Judge not, that you be not judged." This verse is often used to discourage any form of criticism or discernment. But is that really what Jesus meant? In the full context of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, He is warning against hypocritical judgment. He goes on to say that we should first remove the plank from our own eye before addressing the speck in our brother's eye. Jesus isn't telling us to avoid making any judgments. Rather, He's teaching us to examine our own hearts first and to be humble and fair when we do need to discern right from wrong. Romans 8:28. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This verse is sometimes used to imply that God will make everything in our lives work out perfectly. But the good that Paul refers to isn't necessarily about comfort or success. In the broader context of Romans 8, Paul is talking about God's ultimate plan of conforming us to the image of Christ. Sometimes this good involves challenges and growth through suffering. It's about God's eternal plan for our transformation, not just our immediate happiness. Finally, let's look at 1 Timothy 6:10. "For the love of money is the root of all evil." This verse is often misquoted as "money is the root of all evil," which makes it sound like having money itself is inherently bad. But Paul is specifically talking about the love of money. It's not money that's evil, but the obsession with it, putting wealth above all else. That leads to all kinds of harmful behaviors. Money can be used for good or ill. It's our attitude towards it that matters. These 5 verses are just a few examples of how taking scripture out of context can lead to misunderstandings. When we take the time to explore the historical and scriptural background, we can see the deeper, more meaningful messages that God has for us. The Bible is rich with wisdom, but understanding it fully means looking beyond the surface. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if there are other verses you'd like us to dive into. Remember, the more we understand, the closer we grow to the truth. Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep growing.